do, I won't give up on you. See, these machines can bring you back to life.
Hey guys and gals, welcome to another episode of the Man Talks podcast, where we're dedicated to building better men through conversation, connection, and community. This podcast brings together the best thought leaders, teachers, and extraordinary individuals to teach and mentor you on how to be a top performer in life, love, and business. Imagine having experienced mentors with decades of wisdom delivered right to your ears. We talk about purpose, legacy, influence, love, success, sex, and so much more. Don't forget to leave us a review, subscribe, and join the thousands of other change makers in our community on Facebook or go to mantalks.com. Now let's get on to today's show. Jason MacKenzie is going to teach you how to be a stronger, wiser, and more courageous father. Jason MacKenzie draws from his experiences as a survivor of his wife's battle with bipolar disorder and subsequent suicide, and has overcome a decade-long battle with alcohol. But he's finally become the father his kids have always deserved. By being vulnerable, he's helping his daughters to use his experience to inform the choices they make. His driving purpose is to lift those who want more from their lives to increasingly higher levels of personal and professional performance through cultivating the power of vulnerability. He teaches them it's in the crucible of authenticity where they will develop unlimited strength, courage, and wisdom. His mission is to equip every person with the tools to make the choices that will create more of what they want in their lives. So let's bring on Mr. Jason MacKenzie. Hi, Jason. Welcome to the Man Talks podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you today.
Awesome. Before we get started, we always like to ask our guest if they can share with us a defining moment for them as a man. I'm wondering if you have something that comes to mind.
I certainly do. My defining moment as a man was August 30th, 2014, and it was the moment my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter at the time, walked up to me, looked me in the eye, and told me she was disappointed in me, actually. And it was at that moment that I put down the bottle that had been plaguing my life for a long time, for the last time. And it was really the turning point for me in starting to create a completely different life for myself and for my family and for really everybody that I come into contact with.
That must have been absolutely crushing.
It was crushing, but you know what? It was incredibly liberating at the same time, because it really allowed me to stop lying to myself and lying to everybody else and really just be vulnerable and take a sort of a fearless inventory of myself without judgment. I was just so tired of, rationalizing what I was doing and really living a lie. So my daughter's, having the courage to be honest with me gave me the courage to be honest with myself. And it turned out to be it was very hard at that moment, but shortly after, it was quite clear to me that it was going to change the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible when, people are willing to, even especially at a young age like that, they're willing to take a stand for us and just, be radically honest with us. But, the question that I would love to dive into is how did you sort of overcome that addiction? So, as somebody who has battled with addiction in the past, I think it's always important to sort of share that journey with people a little bit, because, I think so many people struggle with addiction in some way, shape, or form. So I'm curious, did you go like the traditional route, or how did you end up moving through that addiction?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's one I've talked to quite a few people about. I talked to somebody about it this morning, actually, who's struggling. I had tried and failed to quit drinking, 1,000 times before it finally took, I guess. And for me, really what it was I didn't go any traditional route. For me, the key thing was vulnerability. And, I define vulnerability as having the courage to look yourself in the mirror and be honest and without judgment about who you see staring back at you. And when her words gave me the courage to be able to do that. And when I did that, I realized that I just wasn't the man I wanted to be. And I couldn't pretend any longer. So what happened in that time was, what really, I guess, cemented it for me was after a period of sobriety, and it felt different to me. I didn't feel like I was white knuckling it all the time. I started to share my story, because I've got quite an interesting story with my first wife's suicide and mental illness and suicide, and kind of drinking through that process. And so when I stopped drinking, I really started sharing the real version of my story with people, not the the varnished, sanitized version where I look like a hero, but the real version where I was severely human. And I had moments of, where I stood pretty tall, and I had a lot of moments where I fell miserably short when I was pushed beyond my limits. But I decided to start just telling that version of the story. And the craziest thing happened, and I mean, it seems straightforward now, but it honestly, I didn't think it would happen, is people responded in kind. Because by being honest and open and vulnerable, it really gave them, created a safe place for them to do the same thing. And I started making these connections with people and really creating these opportunities for myself and for each other collaboratively. And I don't know, I just started, I really outgrew the problems that I was drinking to run away from in the first place. And I really think that's a powerful message. It never personally resonated with me that I needed to admit that I was powerless over alcohol. I could never accept that. And, some people, that's the route they need to take, and that's fine. That's everybody's on their own journey. But for me, I couldn't accept that premise. So, but what I've really learned is that, what I coach people on now is that, as you start doing more of what's right about you and more of what's works, you are naturally going to outgrow what's not working in your life. And I think vulnerability and being open and honest with yourself and others is really the first step towards, beginning that journey.
I can't help but think that there's a lot of guys out there and women that are listening to this episode right now that are probably, struggling with something in their lives, and they need that extra push to break out of it. I'm wondering if you can share with us that unsanitized version of your story, going back all the way to your first wife.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I met the woman who became my first wife when I was 19 years old. And we had a very traditional, I lived what I tell people is a very should life. I should go to college. I should get a corporate job. I should climb the corporate ladder. I should step on anybody that gets in my way. I should, protect myself from everybody around me who I thought wanted to harm me. And it really seemed to be working. I mean, I had a house with a pool. I mean, all the sort of material indicators were there to tell me that what I was doing was working. But I also lived a very narrow definition of what it meant to be a man, a very traditional definition of, emotions are irrational, therefore they are weakness. Logic is strength. And that's what, my job was to be strong. So after the birth of our second daughter, my wife was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, I can look back before that time and certainly see a lot of red flags, but I couldn't see them at the time. I wasn't willing to. I didn't have enough life experience or context in which to place them. So I really wanted my life to unfold according to my plan, because the more it unfolded according to my plan, the more it validated me as a man, right? That I knew what I was doing, that I was creating the life that I wanted. So when she became sick, I mean, just for people who don't know what bipolar disorder is, it's a horrific mental illness. And for my wife, it really, over a period of 6 years, destroyed her life. She was a police officer with the OPP. And, she ended up living in homeless shelters, running with drug addicts, being institutionalized, getting electroshock therapy, spending us to near bankruptcy, just incredibly risky, horrific behaviors. And, for me, everything in my life went from this, great certainty, I guess, to total uncertainty. I had no idea what was going to happen from one day to the next. So I was trying to raise my daughters through this time and keep my wife alive and keep myself sane. I didn't have any emotional sort of infrastructure, I guess, to be able to deal with any of that when it was happening. I mean, the way I looked at it was I wasn't going to talk to somebody about how I was feeling, because talking about it wouldn't do anything to make Cindy not sick. So I had better things that I needed to focus on, which was getting through the day. I know now, and it sounds so obvious to say it out loud, but I know now that we all feel every human emotion. That's part of our humanity, and it's part of what makes us rich and diverse and strong and resilient. But I didn't know that at the time. So invariably when, my emotions would sort of erupt, I guess, like a volcano, it would always be at these inopportune times where I would break down crying, at some moment when I least expected it. I'd have an anxiety attack at the dinner table. I'd blurt my life story out to the lady standing behind me in the grocery store when she asked me for the price of strawberries. And whenever these things happened, all I could see was cracks forming in the dam. Like I was the only thing that could keep this ship upright, and I was falling apart. So ultimately, I sort of just turned to drinking to calm those those fears and anxieties, and it worked, or it appeared to work, except I drank away joy and passion and hope and gratitude. And those were already in, really short supply. And that was really when I needed them the most. And so I became, I don't know, I just became just trying to soldier through life, trying to raise my kids and, just drinking my emotions away. And that really carried on for a long time after she died. After she died, I ended up remarrying to an incredible woman who's helped me get to where I am today. But I thought that when Cindy died, I just turned the page and closed that chapter. And I said, okay, it's thank God that's over. It's time to build a new life. And what I realized was, man, for a long time, I ran from having to grieve her death. I thought grief was a thing that just weak people did, while strong people, got up and carried on with taking care of business. And when I finally quit drinking and gave myself the space to, feel and kind of learn how to deal with my emotions, I started grieving her death. And it was 5 years after it happened. And it was quite an experience. But, I was able to let my kids in on that process because I think it's important. And I want them to know that they will face tragedy at some time in their lives. It's just part of the human condition. And I want them to know that, to see what it's like and to see that it's nothing to be scared from, but to also know that their dad has been through it and that I'm a safe place to turn to when they are inevitably faced with that. So yeah, that's kind of the Coles Notes version of the story.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. I know that, for a lot of the listeners out there, I mean, even for us sitting here, it's a really powerful story to hear. And it's probably even years and years later, still a heavy thing to share with people, but, it really has a capacity to impact people and create positive change. And one of the things that we have put out quite a bit, we asked our community lately, what was something that they wanted us to touch on. And oddly enough, there was a huge response from people wanting us to dive into grief, because grief seems to be something that a lot of men really struggle with. And, the response came from a lot of women in our community who were saying, my husband or my father or my brother is dealing with the loss of something or someone, and they don't know how to deal with it. And I see them struggling. Mm-hmm. And it's been really interesting to see. And I have this saying, which is what you avoid, you become. And so it's like the more that you avoid grief, the more that you become grief. And eventually it's just going to take over. So I'm curious as to, can you share your process with dealing with the grief and what that was like and how you moved through that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So it's really interesting, actually, because, for me, it was sort of, it was a bunch of things sort of coming together at the same time. Like I was really starting to experience a lot of emotions at this point in my life that I had never really let myself feel, So I'd wake up and I'd be able to say to my wife, God, I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel terrible. I'm crabby, and God, I feel like there's something, I'm broken. She goes, and she would say, you're having a bad day, you idiot. It's like, it happens to all of us. You just never really let yourself feel that way. So, as I was sort of going through this process of learning how to deal with these emotions, I noticed myself starting to think about Cindy more. And I had really not thought about her very much at all. And it was, sometimes I would just get extremely sad, break down, just about what I had lost. And I guess grieving there were some pretty dark years there, and just kind of, I don't know, thinking back to some of those things that had happened and some of the things that I had done, and not really from not from a guilt point of view. I don't have any guilt or shame about it. Those things happened, and I feel like I'm using them now, in a net positive way. And then I started to write, actually, and I was writing a lot about her, about the things that had happened. I remember saying to my wife, now, do you find this odd that I'm writing so much about my dead ex-wife? And she said, of course not. This is something you need to do. And it's also a great service to people, right? So that happened. And I found myself doing things like, I'm into like road cycling. So I rode my bike 100 kilometers to her grave one day. I felt like I needed to do that. And, it was weird because I think part of me, I knew it was a 200 kilometer round trip. And I don't know, I just felt like part of me, I don't know, wanted to suffer or something in some way to relate to the suffering that she went through. I'm not, that's kind of what I think I was doing, but
There was perhaps some guilt there in some shape.
possibly. Yeah. I mean, possibly, and I guess, I think she went through a big part of her life never feeling worthy. She had a very, tragic upbringing, and it really came back to haunt her in her later years. But I think what I wanted her to see somehow is that she was worthy of me really pushing myself to go visit her or something. I think that's more what it was. And it's a kind of it sounds strange to say it out loud, but it's how I felt at the time. And that's part of the grieving process. And so what ended up happening was it allowed me to put our lives together into a different context. Like I look back on it differently. I don't look back on it anymore as, like this terrible, terrible time in my life. Like it was very difficult, but I more look back on it as a real series of steps in the journey that took me to where I am today. And that's a very, I guess, empowering way to look at it, because I don't think back and, I don't look back on it and, think of all those tough times and lost years. I more think of it as, what did I learn from this experience, and how can I use this to be of service to other people? And so I still have moments, where I don't know, I'll watch, God, like I watched Forrest Gump this summer. And, and when Jenny dies at the end, I had totally forgotten about that part because I hadn't watched it in like 20 years. And
That's
I'm like,
so funny. It's so funny you said that. My wife and I watched Forrest Gump on Sunday or Saturday night, and both of us were bawling.
oh yeah. Like
I
I
hadn't
was
seen it for like 15 years.
I know. I was a write-off at the end. The kids were like,
Yeah.
But you know what? It was, and the other thing you realize as you watch movies, just as a sort of an aside, in this, in our situation where their mom died, every movie ever made, the mother dies. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but yeah. So but it allowed me to, I can talk to my kids about that. And, it's funny. I think the last thing I'll say about it is that in some ways it's helped me to love her again, in some way. Like I just look back on our time together. We spent 16 years together, and I can really look back on it now in terms of the gifts and the contribution that our time together made to my life now. So it's a very, very important process, and it's nothing to fear. There's just some discomfort about it, but it really is a natural part of, healing and living our fullest lives.
One of the things that I take away from what you just said, and I think is incredibly empowering for the men out there that are going through something like this, is that it is a process, but it's going to be different for everybody, the way that they go through that process. And literally you are processing it. In your case, you rode 100 kilometers to her gravesite, and you journaled. For some men, they're going to do something different. And I think as men, we have a tendency to kind of become stagnant and not do anything in absence of knowing what to do. And I think there is no real manual for how to do this. Yes, there are the 5 stages of grieving and all that sort of stuff, but just how those manifest are going to be different for everybody. So I think one of the best things you can do is just move, do something, take action, and it can come in any way, shape, or form. You've been talking a lot about your kids, and your book is all about being a father. Both Connor and I are not fathers that we know of. Just curious, what is the most misunderstood part about being a father? Because I think, there's all these, I guess, sort of stereotypes and stigmas about being a father. But, now that you've had 2 children, what do you think is misunderstood about the whole process?
I think what maybe the greatest lost opportunity that I see happen all the time, this is really the reason I wrote the book, is that we are conditioned to think that the best way for us to connect with our children or to have a relationship with our children is as one role in the family to another. So parent to child. Really, the most powerful way to build a unbreakable relationship with your kids is to connect with them as one human being to another. And really what that means is being vulnerable with them. So often, I just had a conversation with somebody about this yesterday, but we don't tell our kids that we feel the exact same human emotions that they feel. We try to talk to them about what they're going through in some kind of abstract way, but what they really want to hear is that, listen, they want empathy. They want to know that you've been where they are, or maybe you're there right now. Like, so for example, my daughter, I'll give you a quick example. She has a grade 8 project coming up, and she's terrified of this project because it's a year-long project, and all she's ever seen is the completed projects from some of the older grades. So she's never seen sort of the evolution of these projects. So she just sees these amazing final projects and thinks, good God, how am I ever going to create that? But for me to talk to her, like when I talked to her about it at first, I was writing the book. And instead of saying, look, you're going to figure this thing out and you're going to have support from your teacher, I told her, like, I know exactly how you feel, because I am in the middle right now of taking on the biggest project that I have ever taken on. And I could not be more fearful and uncomfortable. Like, I don't even know how I'm going to finish this. And I don't know if anybody's going to read it. I'm scared that I'm going to send it to the book publisher and he's going to say, this is the biggest pile of crap I've ever seen, and send it back to me and I'll have to start again. And my saying that to her, but I also said, even though there's all that fear, I do believe in myself and I do believe that I will figure out how to get it done. But it's just it's day by day. Some days are great, some days suck. And, being able to talk to her in those terms, just one person to another, helped her really relate to me. So really the message was to her, like, let's just figure this stuff out together. We're both working on these projects at the same time. Let's just keep talking about it, and which we did. And I finished the book and she's still working on her project, but, it really helped her understand that we're really not that different. We're on our own journeys and we're at different points of our journeys, but fundamentally we feel the same emotions. And when kids realize that, they feel connected to you. Your kids don't want to not feel connected to you. They want to feel connected to you. We just, as parents, put up all these roadblocks because, we think we need to, preach from a pulpit instead of lying quietly in bed with our kids and sharing our stories with them, So I think that's for me the most powerful lesson I've learned.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's huge. It's interesting. Roger and I are kind of coming to that age where there's a lot of men in our community that are starting to have kids. And it's been so interesting to see how their life shifts, dramatically. And I think it's funny to see, watching some of them, they've kind of gone through this process of just being like, yeah, it'll be okay. I'm super excited and it's going to be great. And then all of a sudden this little human shows up in their life and they're like, oh my gosh, I was not prepared for this. And,
yeah.
and it's really quite funny to see how a lot of men, start to have a sense of self-reflection after their child is born, that maybe wasn't there before. And so I'm curious, do you dive into some of this in the book where you talk about, the transition of becoming a father and what that, maybe what they can expect?
Not so much that specifically, but I do talk about some aspects of it. Like I do talk about the fact that as a dad, you need to be prepared for the fact that you may hate your child at the beginning. Okay. Because you didn't carry it around and all of a sudden you've got this thing that doesn't sleep and you feel no emotional connection to it. And you don't, it's like I spent many nights thinking, oh my God, what have I done? This kid is ruining my life. And then feeling terribly guilty about thinking that. But no, I mean, the book is it's really a book about how vulnerability transforms not just your relationships with your kids, but about how it transforms your relationships with your spouse, how it can make you a better partner, a better lover to your spouse, and also how it makes you a better leader and a more effective and powerful, positively powerful human being. That's really what it's about. I'm trying to really dispel this notion that this really antiquated notion of what strength is supposed to be and what a man is supposed to be. And I want people to understand that, we are better together. All of us are better together and we are surrounded by people. And you guys, I'm sure, can know this, deeply from the work you're doing, but we're surrounded by people that want to help us. And there's really nothing to fear from, admitting that we don't know something or asking for help. It feels good to help someone. So when you ask someone for help, you're actually doing a service to them because you're giving them the opportunity to help you and to feel good. So that's really the message of what the book is about. And it's a lot of stories about how there's a ton of books about parenting, but there is no manual. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes. And I think, one of the greatest things you can do for your kids is let them see how the sausage is made when it comes to parenting. There's been tons of times where I've said to my kids, God, how I thought that was going to turn out and how that actually turned out were like completely opposite. So, sorry, but I know I know that you trust that my intentions are good. So let's chalk that up to a learning experience, but let's talk about it. Like, I'm a human being, man. I screwed the pooch there. So there's a lot of lessons like that too. So I think we live, a lot of people live their lives being fearful of being seen as an imposter or being called out for making a mistake, when really mistakes are just lessons to be learned and shared with our kids. So maybe they don't have to make them too.
That's awesome. I love that. And I appreciate the fact that you're bringing vulnerability into the space of, it's okay to open it up and sort of pull the curtain aside and say, okay, so, I messed up there, whether it's with your wife or with your kids. So that's fantastic. And, just as we start to wrap up here, I'm just curious as to whether or not you can share with us maybe like, what's the one biggest lesson that you've learned in your marriage and your relationship that really you feel is like the keys to success for you?
I think the biggest lesson I have learned in my life that has applied to my relationship and my marriage is that if you are unwilling to be honest with yourself, you will automatically lie to everybody else in your life. So it's super, super important to be able to, again, look yourself in the mirror and be honest and without judgment about who you see staring back at you. Because once you do that, that completely frees you up to start showing the world and the people, even the people closest to you, and then the world, your authentic self. And that is when you are at your best. So your spouse deserves that from you. Your kids deserve that from you. And most importantly, you deserve that from yourself.
Connor and I just did a little mic drop in the...
An air mic drop.
We did a mic drop. Yeah, that was good. Jason, what's your favorite part about being a man?
Oh, God. You know what? Well, I would say my favorite part of being a man right now is being surrounded by the women in my life. I feel like it's like my favorite part of being a man is actually being a father to my daughters and being able to set the bar really high for what they expect in the men in their lives or the partners in their life. And I think, maybe a little broader than that, my favorite part of being a man is being able to share what I'm learning with other men. It's, there's guys are dying for it. And just to be able to be of service that way, show them that there's maybe a different way to be a strong, courageous, and wise man and father. I feel like it's a real gift, and I feel like it's my life's work. So,
and what would you say is the biggest challenge about being a man?
I think the biggest challenge, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge about being a man is probably a lot of the stigma that still exists around what it means to be a strong man, or what it takes to get ahead in the world, and that it's cutthroat, and we gotta, it's really about, we can't collaborate ourselves to joint success. It's eat or be eaten kind of thing. It's a very powerful stigma, and it can be a challenge for sure. I'm trying to break that. But I still find myself, like, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I still sometimes find myself succumbing to those, just a natural state of being. I'm much better than I was, but life's a journey. So yeah, I would say that's a challenge.
We've asked you a few questions in a row here. We might as well run into a bit of a rapid fire ending to this conversation. We always like to ask our guests a series of, sort of funner, more in-depth questions that kind of break out from what we're talking about. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Go.
Perfect.
All right. So, in your opinion, who is the most influential person of all time?
Well, okay, mine is Ron Paul. Okay, I'm a libertarian, so I love that guy. Probably most of your audience hasn't heard of the guy, but that's my most influential person in my life.
We've heard of him.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And who would you say is the most resilient?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I'm going to say, this is going to sound corny, but I'm going to say my dad probably, He had an incredibly challenging childhood, like brutal. And he has turned into just an incredibly ethical, honest man that I'm grateful to have as a father. So he's my model for resilience.
Amazing. I was going to ask you who the bravest person is next, but it sounds like that one might be covered by your dad as well. It's kind of sounds like it's in that same category.
Yeah, probably.
All right. So the most underrated trait for modern day success, in your opinion?
Vulnerability. Without a doubt, vulnerability and the authenticity that flows from it. Being yourself.
What is something that everyone should experience at least once?
I think that everyone should experience the great discomfort that comes from trying something that scares the living hell out of you.
Nice.
Very cool.
What is the one book that you would bring with you on a desert island?
God, let me think about that for a second. I'm going to say that the book that really changed my life is, and that I feel the biggest attachment to, is honestly The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. I don't know if you guys.
Very cool.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I actually met him a few weeks ago, and I'm going to be on his podcast. But that book just really changed my life because it helped me understand that not every single thing I do needs to produce a quantifiable, immediate result. You know what I mean? That you can set yourself up for success throughout the day by doing specific routines in the morning. That was a totally eye-opening experience for me.
Awesome. No, we're big fans of Hal. We want to get Hal on the show as well. So when you meet him, if you can give us a shout out as well, that'd be great. And finally, what's the one thing that you're super excited about these days that you want everybody in Man Talks land to know about? And how can they learn more about you specifically if they want to say hi or learn more about yourself and the book?
Yeah. So what I'm most excited about now is the work that I'm doing in the field of appreciative inquiry. So, I mean, one of the ways that we're told to get better in our lives is to fix all the things that are broken about us. And then that'll help us make us successful. But appreciative inquiry posits that really, there's already so many things that work about us or about a system that if we focus on creating more of what already works, we will create sustainable and lasting change. And it's such an uplifting, amazing methodology for helping people understand that, you're not broken. There's a ton of stuff that works about you. And if you start doing more of the stuff that works, you're just going to outgrow some of the stuff that doesn't work. So I do doing mastermind groups around that. And I'm putting together some leadership training because I've never met a leader that embodied these principles. And I really believe that it could really create a new paradigm as far as leadership in the corporate world. And my website is thebookofopen.com. And really there I give people a platform to share their stories. There's people that have shared some incredible stories on there. And I really want to help people cultivate vulnerability and realize that it's so liberating to just finally tell your own version of your own truth. And so there's some very powerful stories on there. It's really a passion project for me. And you can find some information about my book, The Deadly Book of Open, there as well. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I will always respond, and I will do anything I can to help anybody. And my email is jason@thebookofopen.com.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on the show. Guys out there and ladies, if you want to listen to more episodes of the Man Talks podcast, you can go to mantalks.com/podcast, or please subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher. Download the podcast so that it's automatically updated to your phone. You're never going to miss an episode. Plus, please leave us a ratings on iTunes or Stitcher to help man it forward and get the Man Talks podcast into as many ears as possible. Thank you so much for listening to the Man Talks podcast. Catch us next week for another interview as we build better men through conversation, connection, and community together.